Chapter 1: The Road That Narrows. The rented sedan kicked up dust from the unpaved track, rattling Mara's teeth. She squinted through the windshield, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Trees pressed close on either side, dense and dark green, their leaves coated in the same fine ochre dust that filmed the car. Her map, spread across the passenger seat, showed this dwindling path as the only route into the deeper parts of the Blackwood region. Somewhere beyond this suffocating timberland lay a valley, unnamed on her map but referenced in the brittle pages of a folklorist's journal from 80 years prior. A valley said to hold echoes of songs long silenced elsewhere. That was Mara's goal, capturing ghosts on magnetic tape. Her audio recorder, a hefty professional model, sat secured in a foam-padded case on the back seat. Beside it, a backpack held microphones, cables, batteries, water bottles, and high-energy bars, enough for a few days off-grid. The folklorist's journal mentioned a small, isolated community, protective of its traditions. Mara hoped protective didn't mean hostile. She'd encountered suspicion before, recording laments in remote mountain villages, but this place felt different even before she arrived. The sparse entries described unusual customs, a deep reverence for the local river, and songs with unsettling, discordant harmonies. The track narrowed further. Branches scraped against the car's paintwork with screeching complaints. The air grew heavier, cooler, carrying a damp, loamy scent beneath the dust. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the canopy overhead, casting the path in a perpetual twilight. Mara slowed the car, engine whining in a lower gear. The folklorist, Abernathy, had traveled on foot, taking weeks. Mara had hours, yet the sense of isolation was profound. No phone signal for the last 20 miles. No other tire tracks on this path. Just the persistent buzz of insects and the complaining groan of the overworked car. She checked the fuel gauge, over half a tank, enough to get back out provided the track remained passable. Abernathy's journal spoke of sudden rains turning the soil into an impassable mire. He wrote of the river, the valley's heart, calling it the lifeblood stream. Locals, he noted, avoided using its proper name if it had one. They spoke around it, attributing strange properties to its waters. Healing, some claimed. Madness, whispered others. Abernathy himself seemed unsettled by it, his academic objectivity wavering in later entries. He described its color as unnatural, a deep, unsettling reddish-brown, especially after heavy rain. A loud thump jolted Mara. She slammed the brakes, heart hammering against her ribs. Silence descended, thick and immediate, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine. Ahead, sprawled across the track, lay a large animal. A deer, perhaps. No, the shape was wrong. Too bulky, too low to the ground. Its fur, where visible beneath a coat of mud and something darker, was a matted, unhealthy gray. Mara switched off the engine. The silence deepened. She reached for the heavy-duty flashlight beside her seat, its metal cool against her palm. Opening the car door slowly, she stepped out into the humid air. The smell hit her first, decay, sharp and foul, mixed with the earthy dampness. She approached cautiously, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. It wasn't a deer. It looked like a wild boar, but distorted. Its snout was too long, its legs too thick and short. Patches of its hide were bare, revealing skin the color of raw liver. One eye, milky white, stared sightlessly at the canopy. The other was a ruin swarming with flies. The cause of death was obvious: massive trauma to its flank, a ragged tear exposing bone and pulped flesh. Something large had attacked it. A bear, unlikely this far south. A feral dog pack, possible, but the wound seemed deliberate, precise almost. A shiver traced its way down Mara's spine. This wasn't natural predation. She scanned the surrounding trees, flashlight beams sweeping across dense undergrowth. Nothing moved. No sound but the drone of insects over the carcass. She needed to move it. The car couldn't pass. Gritting her teeth against the stench, she grabbed one of the creature's stiff, bristly legs. It was heavier than it looked. She strained, pulling, dragging the carcass inch by inch towards the side of the track. Her boots slipped on something slick. Looking down, she saw a dark, viscous fluid spreading from beneath the boar. It wasn't just blood. It was thicker, almost oily and disturbingly red, soaking into the ochre dust. River water. Abernathy wrote the color was reddish-brown, not this deep, arterial crimson. Sweat dripped into her eyes. She heaved again, the dead weight resisting. Finally, with a grunt, she pulled it far enough into the ferns lining the track. Wiping her hands on her jeans, she shone the light back towards the fluid staining the ground. It wasn't drying or soaking in quickly. It pooled, glistening unnaturally in the beam, like fresh paint or fresh blood. Back in the car, Mara locked the doors, the click echoing in the confined space. She started the engine, the sound unnervingly loud after the silence. Steering carefully around the dark patch on the ground, she pressed onward, the image of the mutilated boar and the strange red fluid imprinted behind her eyelids. The valley Abernathy described couldn't be much further. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a low hum she couldn't quite place. The trees began to thin slightly, revealing glimpses of steep, enclosing slopes ahead. The track dipped sharply downward. She navigated a series of tight bends, brakes squealing in protest. Then the forest opened abruptly. Before her lay the valley. It was deeper, narrower than she'd imagined, a sharp cleft in the earth. Steep sides, thick with the same dark timberland, plunged towards a ribbon of water snaking along the valley floor. The river. Even from this distance, its color was startling. Not reddish-brown, it was red. A deep, opaque, unsettling crimson, like a vein slashed open across the landscape. No sunlight reflected from its surface. It seemed to absorb the light. A flat, matte gash flowing silently between banks of unnaturally vibrant green vegetation. A thin plume of smoke rose from halfway down the valley, suggesting habitation. The settlement Abernathy mentioned. Mara pulled the car over, engine idling, and reached for her binoculars. She focused on the smoke source. A cluster of low buildings built from rough-hewn timber and river stones nestled close to the water. They looked primitive, functional. No roads led to them, only footpaths winding down the slopes. She scanned the river banks. Figures moved near the water's edge. Too far to make out details, but they seemed occupied with some task. Washing, fishing. Then one figure straightened, turning towards the slope where she sat parked. Even through the binoculars, Mara felt a prickle of unease. The figure remained motionless, seemingly staring directly at her location, a dark silhouette against the crimson river. Mara lowered the binoculars, her hand trembling slightly. Protective, Abernathy had written. Had they seen the car, heard the engine? This wasn't a place accustomed to visitors. The track ended here, petering out into a rocky outcrop overlooking the descent. No way to drive further. She'd have to proceed on foot if she wanted to reach the settlement, leaving the car exposed. She considered turning back. The mutilated boar, the unnerving color of the river, the silent watcher below, warning signs stacked one atop the other. But the songs. Abernathy's journal described melodies unlike anything recorded, haunting harmonies tied intrinsically to this strange valley and its crimson heart. The professional curiosity warred with primal fear. Taking a deep breath, she killed the engine. The silence rushed back in, now filled with the imagined sound of the crimson water flowing below. She would go down, cautiously, record what she could from a distance perhaps, make contact only if necessary. She locked the car, shouldered her backpack, and slung the recorder case over her other shoulder. The weight was familiar, reassuring, tools of her trade. The descent path was steep, loose scree shifting underfoot. Twice, she nearly lost her footing, grabbing onto roots and branches to steady herself. The air grew thicker, damper, carrying the river's scent, a coppery, metallic tang beneath the loam and decaying leaves. Insects buzzed louder here, fat black flies and iridescent beetles crawling over lush, oversized ferns. The vegetation near the river seemed unnaturally green, almost feverish in its growth. As she got lower, she heard it. Not singing, not yet. A rhythmic sound. A wet, slapping noise accompanied by low guttural chants. She paused, crouching behind a thicket of rhododendrons, their waxy leaves providing cover. Peering through the foliage, she could see the settlement more clearly. Several figures stood waist-deep in the crimson water, rhythmically beating the surface with flat, paddle-like implements. Others knelt on the bank, chanting in low, monotonous tones. Their clothing was simple, earth-colored tunics and trousers. Their faces, obscured by distance and shadow, seemed turned towards the water in rapt attention. She couldn't understand the words, but the cadence was hypnotic, disturbing. One figure stood apart, taller than the others, near the center of the small cluster of buildings. Clad in darker robes, hands clasped, watching the ritual at the river. Vorlag, the leader Abernathy hinted at. Then a movement closer caught her eye. Near the edge of the settlement, partially hidden by a dilapidated shed, a younger man worked, chopping wood. He moved with a jerky inefficiency, glancing repeatedly towards the river ritual, then quickly looking away. His face, when he turned briefly towards Mara's hiding place, seemed pale, strained. Kalen. The wavering initiate wasn't part of this book. It was a name she invented now. The name felt right. Mara raised her directional microphone, slipping on headphones. She adjusted the gain, aiming the mic towards the river. The chanting filled her ears, clearer now but no more comprehensible. Beneath it, the rhythmic slapping and something else. A faint, almost subaudible hum emanating from the water itself. It set her teeth on edge, resonated deep in her chest. Suddenly, the chanting stopped. The figures in the water ceased their beating. Silence, except for the omnipresent hum. The figure she assumed was Kalen froze, axe halfway through its swing. Even the insects seemed momentarily muted. From the edge of the forest, near where the valley path met the settlement, a shape emerged. Huge, bulky, dripping dark slime that sizzled faintly on the unnaturally green grass. It walked with a lurching gait, heavy feet thudding on the earth. Its form was vaguely humanoid but distorted, swollen, its skin a patchwork of gray hide and crimson-stained growths. It dragged a crude club made of wood and stone fused together. It scanned the settlement edge, small, deeply set eyes glowing with a dull red light. Grok, the name slammed into Mara's mind, unbidden. This was a guardian. Something Abernathy hadn't mentioned, perhaps couldn't bring himself to write about. It stopped, sniffing the air, its massive head turning slowly towards the slope where Mara hid. Panic seized her. She ducked lower, pressing herself against the damp earth, heart pounding like a drum against her ribs. The microphone slipped from her grasp, landing softly on the moss. She held her breath, praying the thick foliage concealed her. The creature, Grok, remained motionless for a long moment, head tilted as if listening. Then, with a guttural grunt that seemed to shake the ground, it turned and lumbered towards the forest edge on the opposite side of the settlement, disappearing among the trees. Mara let out her breath in a ragged gasp, trembling. What had she walked into? This wasn't just an isolated community with strange songs. This was something else, something deeply wrong. The Crimson River flowed silently below, no longer just a geographical feature but a source of palpable dread. The air hummed. The ground felt tainted, and the guardians were real. She needed to leave. Now. Retrieving her microphone, she began to back away, moving slowly, deliberately, up the treacherous slope towards the distant, silent car. But the image of the Red River, the chanting figures, and the monstrous guardian remained burned into her vision. The valley had her attention. It felt unlikely to let go easily. Chapter 2: Echoes in Crimson Mud. Retreating up the slope proved harder than the descent. Loose rocks skittered under Mara's boots, echoing too loudly in the quiet air. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sounded like pursuit. She risked glances back towards the settlement. No one seemed to have noticed her presence. The figures by the river remained still, seemingly locked in silent communion with the crimson water. The tall, robed figure, Vorlag, hadn't moved. Kalen, the woodcutter, had resumed his work, but his movements were still hesitant, his gaze flicking nervously towards the trees where Grok had vanished. Mara reached the outcrop where she'd left the car, breathing heavily, relief washing over her. The sedan sat undisturbed, coated in a thicker layer of dust, looking alien and vulnerable in this wild place. She fumbled with the keys, unlocked the door, and slid inside, locking it again immediately. Safety. Relative safety. She started the engine, the sound roaring defiance against the valley's oppressive silence. She needed to document what she'd seen, what she'd heard. Professional instinct warred with the urge to floor the accelerator and never look back. Taking the recorder from its case, she plugged in her headphones, rewound the tape slightly, and pressed play. The sound quality was surprisingly good. The rhythmic slapping, the low chants clearer now, though still incomprehensible. Then the hum. Listening intently, she realized it wasn't just the river. It seemed embedded within the chanting, a resonant frequency beneath the guttural tones. It made the fillings in her teeth ache. She fast-forwarded to the moment Grok appeared. The recording captured the heavy thud of its footsteps, the sickening wetness of its movements, and the low, earth-shaking grunt. Hearing it again, safe inside the car, was terrifying. She needed context. Abernathy's journal. She retrieved it from her bag, brittle pages whispering as she turned them. She searched for mentions of guardians, of rituals involving beating the water, of the crimson color being so vivid. He described the river's hue as variable, deepening after rains. He spoke of purification rites, but nothing like the scene she witnessed. He mentioned unease, local whispers of people taken by the river, but framed it as typical folklore. Had he downplayed the reality? Or had things escalated in the 80 years since his visit? His later entries grew more fragmented. He wrote of sleepless nights, of hearing the river's song even miles away, of a growing pressure in his skull. He mentioned a high priest who preached devotion to the river's power, Vorlag. Abernathy described him as compelling, unsettling, his eyes holding an ancient light. The final entry was abrupt. The color deepens, it calls, must understand the source. After that, nothing. Abernathy never returned from the valley. Mara closed the journal, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. Abernathy hadn't just observed, he'd been drawn in. Was the hum she heard the river's song he mentioned? She touched her temples. A faint pressure resided there, unnoticed until now. Was it suggestion, paranoia, or the valley already working its influence? She looked back down at the settlement. The figures by the river were dispersing now, wadding slowly towards the bank, their movements sluggish, coated in the clinging crimson water. Vorlag remained near the buildings, watching them. Kalen stacked the last logs, wiped his brow, and disappeared inside one of the smaller huts. Ordinary actions, yet framed by the crimson river and the memory of Grok, they seemed profoundly sinister. She couldn't leave yet, not without understanding more, not without capturing one of those songs Abernathy risked everything for. Caution warred with obsession, a familiar battle for Mara. She decided on a compromise. Find a better vantage point, further from the settlement but still overlooking the river. Set up her equipment, record from afar. No contact, minimal risk. She drove the car back along the track a quarter-mile, parking it tucked behind a dense thicket of pines, less visible from below. Gathering her gear, she locked the car and started hiking parallel to the valley rim, seeking a natural lookout. The woods here felt different away from the main path. Quieter, denser. Sunlight barely penetrated. The air was still thick with the river's metallic tang. After 20 minutes, she found it. A small, rocky ledge screened by ancient, gnarled oaks, offering a clear view down towards the settlement and a long stretch of the Crimson River. It was perhaps half a mile from the nearest huts, relatively safe. She unpacked her parabolic microphone, tripod, and recorder. Setting up quickly, she donned her headphones and aimed the dish towards the valley floor. The ambient sounds were magnified. The buzz of insects, the distant chuckle of the river over unseen rocks, birdsong that sounded strangely discordant, and beneath it all the persistent low hum. It seemed stronger here, vibrating through the rock beneath her feet. She scanned the settlement. Life proceeded at a slow pace. Figures moved between buildings. Smoke curled from chimneys. Children, she hadn't noticed children before, played near the huts, their games strangely silent. She focused the microphone towards the riverbank downstream from the settlement, where the water curved out of sight. Abernathy mentioned pools where the current slowed, places favored for fishing according to local lore. Perhaps activity occurred there. She adjusted the dish, listening intently. Water sounds dominated. Gurgles, laps, eddies. Then faintly singing. Not the guttural chants from before, this was different. Higher-pitched, melodic, yet profoundly unsettling. Multiple voices, predominantly female, weaving complex harmonies that seemed to shift and slide like the river current itself. It was beautiful and repellent simultaneously. The tones snagged at something deep within her, a resonance that felt both familiar and alien. The river sirens. The name surfaced, cold and sharp. These were the songs Abernathy sought. The singing grew louder, closer, echoing strangely off the valley walls. It seemed to come from the river itself. Mara strained her eyes, scanning the crimson surface through her binoculars. Nothing, just the flat, opaque flow. Yet the voices swelled impossibly near, seeming to emanate from the air around her ledge. The hum intensified, merging with the melody, creating a pressure wave that pulsed against her eardrums. Her vision blurred momentarily. The trees around the ledge seemed to ripple, their colors deepening, darkening. The crimson of the river below pulsed in time with the singing, a vast, beating artery. She felt a pull, a strange longing to go down, to see the singers, to immerse herself in the sound, in the water. With a gasp, she tore the headphones off. Silence crashed down, leaving only the normal sounds of the forest and a ringing in her ears. Her heart raced. Her hands shook. What was that? Mass hypnosis? Acoustic phenomenon? Or something genuinely supernatural? She checked the recorder. The meters had spiked wildly during the singing. It was captured, proof. But the experience terrified her. It wasn't just hearing a song, it felt like an intrusion, an attempted manipulation. She packed the parabolic microphone away, keeping only the standard cardioid mic attached to the recorder, ready for incidental sounds. She needed to ground herself, observe, analyze. She took out her notebook, pen poised, forcing herself to describe the settlement layout, the ritual, the guardian, the river's appearance. Writing calmed her slightly, imposing order on the unsettling phenomena. As she sketched the rough position of the huts, movement below caught her attention. Kalen emerged from his hut, carrying a covered bucket. He walked not towards the river, but upstream, following a faint path along the bank that led away from the main settlement, towards a denser section of woods. He moved furtively, casting glances over his shoulder. Curiosity overriding caution again, Mara focused her binoculars on him. Where was he going? What was in the bucket? He disappeared into the trees. Minutes passed. Mara scanned the area where he vanished. Nothing. Then he reappeared, walking back towards the huts, empty-handed. His shoulders seemed slumped. His face, even from this distance, looked etched with worry or fear. Mara lowered the binoculars, puzzled. What task required such secrecy? Delivering food, offerings, she made a note. Kalen's secretive behavior, upstream path. The afternoon wore on. The sun began its slow descent, painting the dust haze above the valley rim in hues of orange and purple. Down below, shadows lengthened. Lights flickered on in the settlement huts, oil lamps or candles, casting a primitive yellow glow. The crimson river seemed to darken as the light failed, becoming a ribbon of blackness snaking through the twilight. The air grew cooler. Mara pulled on a jacket. The hum persisted, perhaps even stronger in the evening quiet. She ate a protein bar, drank some water, feeling increasingly isolated on her ledge. The forest around her came alive with nocturnal rustlings and clicks. An owl hooted nearby, its call sounding distorted, menacing. She considered packing up, hiking back to the car and driving out under the cover of darkness. But the mystery held her fast. The songs, the transformations Vorlag preached, the nature of the river itself, unanswered questions buzzed like the insects around her head. She decided to stay, at least until full darkness, record any night sounds. Perhaps the singing would return. A new sound drifted up from the settlement, not singing, not chanting, a rhythmic scraping. Metal on stone, she aimed the microphone. The sound was faint but distinct, coming from behind the main cluster of huts near where she'd seen Kalen earlier, sharpening tools, preparing food. It continued steady, methodical, scrape, pause, scrape, pause. Then another sound joined it, a low, wet tearing. Mara's blood ran cold. It was the sound of butchery, but what were they butchering at this hour? And why did it sound so large? The scraping intensified, faster now, more frantic. The tearing sound became a sickening ripping, followed by a heavy, wet thud. A silence. Mara held her breath, listening. Only the river's hum and the night insects remained. Had she imagined it? No. The sounds were too distinct, too visceral. What horrors did this valley conceal after dark? She looked towards the settlement again. Lights burned in a few windows. Figures moved occasionally behind the crude coverings. Nothing seemed overtly amiss, but the memory of the sounds lingered, foul and suggestive. Combined with the image of Grok, the unsettling singing, and Abernathy's fate, a terrifying picture began to form. This cult wasn't just worshipping the river, they were feeding it. A sudden rustling in the leaves directly behind her ledge sent Mara scrambling backwards, heart leaping into her throat. She spun around, flashlight beam stabbing into the darkness beneath the oaks. Two small points of red light glowed back at her from the undergrowth, low to the ground, watching her. Chapter 3: Whispers from the Banks. The red eyes blinked slowly, reflecting Mara's flashlight beam. They belonged to something low and sinuous, partially hidden by ferns. Not Grok. Something smaller, faster. A low growl rumbled from the undergrowth, more a vibration than a sound. Mara tightened her grip on the heavy flashlight, its metal body suddenly feeling inadequate as a weapon. She backed away slowly towards the edge of the ledge, putting distance between herself and the unseen creature. The red eyes followed her movement. She risked a glance over her shoulder. A sheer drop of 50 feet to the rocky slope below. Trapped. "Easy now," she murmured, voice trembling slightly, talking to it. "Stupid. What was it?" From the darkness, a sleek head emerged. Canine, but wrong. The fur was short, patchy, and the same disturbing crimson hue as the river sludge she'd seen earlier. The snout was too long, the teeth protruding slightly even with the jaw closed, stained dark. Its eyes, small and intelligent, glowed with that unnatural red light. A crimson hound. Another piece of the valley's corrupted ecosystem Abernathy failed to mention. It crept forward silently, belly low to the ground, muscles bunched. It wasn't alone. Another pair of red eyes appeared to its left and a third further back. A pack. They fanned out slightly, cutting off any escape along the ridge. Mara swept the flashlight beam across them, trying to appear threatening. They flinched but held their ground, emitting low, menacing snarls. They weren't attacking yet, just containing her, herding her towards the edge. Think recorder, microphone, sounds. She fumbled with the recorder controls, fingers clumsy with fear. Pressing record, she aimed the microphone towards the hounds, capturing their growls, the soft padding of their paws on the leaf litter. If they attacked, at least there would be a record, a grim consolation. One of the hounds, bolder than the others, took a step closer, lip curling back to reveal rows of needle-sharp, red-stained teeth. It lowered its head, preparing to spring. Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension, high-pitched, resonant, not human speech but a complex series of clicks, whistles, and warbling notes. It came from the trees further down the ridge. The hounds froze instantly. Their ears swiveled towards the sound. The lead hound whined softly, tucking its tail slightly. The strange call came again, sharper this time, insistent. With a final, resentful glance at Mara, the lead hound turned and melted back into the undergrowth. The others followed suit. Within seconds they were gone, leaving only the faint, coppery scent of the river behind. Mara stood shaking, flashlight beam dancing on the empty space where the hounds had been. Who, or what had called them off? She scanned the trees in the direction of the sound. Nothing moved. She heard only the night insects and the river's ceaseless hum. Had someone from the settlement intervened? Unlikely. They hadn't seemed aware of her. Was it another creature? Something that commanded the hounds? The valley's hierarchy of horrors was becoming increasingly complex. She couldn't stay here. The ledge was exposed, compromised. She quickly packed her remaining gear, the recorder now feeling less like a tool and more like a desperate black box. She needed the car, needed the road leading away from this cursed valley. Keeping the flashlight beam sweeping constantly around her, she scrambled off the ledge and began picking her way back along the ridge towards where she'd hidden the sedan. Every shadow seemed to hold a pair of red eyes. Every rustle sounded like Grok's lumbering approach. The river's hum felt like a physical pressure against her skull. Reaching the car felt like reaching sanctuary, however illusory. She threw her gear onto the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel, locking the doors. Engine on. Headlights cutting twin paths through the oppressive darkness. She reversed violently, scraping branches, and swung the car back onto the narrow track leading out. The drive was a blur of adrenaline and fear. She pushed the sedan harder than she should have on the rough track, tires spinning in loose dirt, suspension groaning. The forest pressed close, dark and menacing. Was that a flicker of red eyes between the trees? Was that heavy footfall packing the car just beyond the reach of the headlights? Paranoia tightened its icy grip. She didn't relax until the track widened and the trees began to recede, the air losing some of its heavy, metallic dampness. Reaching the barely maintained county road felt like surfacing from underwater. She pulled over, engine idling, and rested her forehead against the steering wheel, taking deep, shuddering breaths. Check the recording. She needed to hear the intervention, the sound that saved her. Plugging in the headphones, she rewound the tape. The hound's growls filled her ears, low, guttural, terrifyingly close. Then the other sound, clearer now without the immediate panic. It wasn't whistles and clicks. It was singing. A single voice, impossibly high and pure, yet cold, inhuman. It held complex microtones and sliding pitches that defied musical scales. It resonated with the same unsettling frequency as the chorus she'd heard earlier, the siren's song. Had one of them been nearby? Had it deliberately saved her? Why? Or was it simply asserting dominance over lesser creatures? A territorial display she happened to benefit from. The ambiguity was almost worse than a direct threat. It implied awareness, observation, perhaps even calculation. She drove on, putting miles between herself and the valley, but the river's hum seemed lodged in her bones. She found a dilapidated motel an hour later, the vacancy sign flickering uncertainly. The room smelled of stale smoke and mildew, but it had solid walls and a lockable door. Exhaustion overwhelmed her. She transferred the audio from the recorder to her laptop, backing it up immediately, labeling the files meticulously: Crimson River Ambient, Ritual Chants, Grok Encounter, Siren Song Fragment, Hound Pack, Unknown Vocalization Intervention. Then she collapsed onto the lumpy bed, falling into a restless sleep filled with images of crimson water and glowing red eyes. She woke hours later, neck stiff, the faint light of dawn filtering through grimy window blinds. The first conscious thought, the recordings. She sat at the cheap particle board desk, laptop open, headphones on, and began to listen again, analyzing the waveforms on the screen. The ritual chants were dense, layered. Running spectral analysis revealed underlying frequencies, the persistent hum clearly visible. Grok's grunt contained infrasound elements, frequencies below human hearing, possibly contributing to the sense of dread. The siren's song was baffling. The harmonics were unstable, shifting, creating psychoacoustic effects designed to disorient and lure. The intervention vocalization shared properties with the siren's song but was simpler, more focused, almost like a command signal. Then she listened to the ambient sounds recorded from the ledge during the afternoon. The river, the insects, the distant settlement noises. She increased the gain, filtering out background hiss. Faintly beneath the other sounds, she caught something else. Whispers, close to the microphone, not the wind, not insects. Human whispers, hushed, furtive. She isolated the segment, amplifying it further. Words emerged from the noise, fragmented, strained. "I can't keep doing this," a male voice, young, familiar Kalen. A pause, then another whisper, barely audible. "He sees everything. The water demands." "Well, not like this, Abernathy," he tried. "And don't speak his name. Quick before." The whisper cut off abruptly, followed by the sound of rustling leaves, receding footsteps. Mara sat back, stunned. Kalen, had he been near her ledge? Had he been talking to someone, or to himself? He knew about Abernathy. He knew Abernathy tried something, tried to expose the cult, to escape, and paid the price. The fear, the furtive glances she'd observed, it wasn't just nerves. It was the terror of someone trapped, aware of the horror, possibly complicit, desperate. She cross-referenced the timing. This conversation happened shortly after she saw Kalen return from his trip upstream, empty-handed. Had he been meeting someone, or leaving a message? Was there a resistance, however small, within the cult? The discovery changed everything. Leaving wasn't an option now. This wasn't just about recording lost songs or observing a strange cult. Abernathy hadn't just stumbled into this, he'd become part of its hidden struggle. Kalen was caught in it too. The fragmented whisper confirmed the sinister nature of the settlement, the deadly enforcement of silence, the river's insatiable demands. She had evidence, audio evidence of the cult's practices, the monstrous guardians, the potentially mind-altering songs, and now internal dissent hinting at darker secrets. She needed more. She needed to understand what Kalen meant. What did the river demand? What happened to Abernathy? Returning to the valley was madness. She knew that. The hounds, Grok, the sirens, Vorlag himself, the dangers were real, lethal. But the whispers, they offered a thread, a potential crack in the cult's oppressive structure. Perhaps Kalen could be reached. Perhaps he was the key. She checked her gear. Batteries charged, storage space cleared, water bottles refilled, high-energy bars restocked from the motel's vending machine. She looked at Abernathy's journal again, his final, desperate words, must understand the source. Mara understood the compulsion now. It wasn't just academic curiosity. It was the pull of an unfinished story, the need to uncover the truth buried beneath the crimson water and the suffocating silence. She closed the laptop, packed her bag, and checked out of the motel. The road back towards the Blackwood, towards the valley, stretched before her under a gray, overcast sky. This time, she wasn't going just to observe. She was going back for answers, prepared for contact, aware that the valley guarded its secrets jealously and violently. The hum seemed to resonate faintly in the car's chassis, a welcoming, predatory thrum. Chapter 4: The First Draft. Mara parked the sedan further back this time, nearly a mile from the valley rim, hidden deep within a copse of pines choked with undergrowth. Camouflage netting, purchased from a surplus store hours ago, draped over the vehicle, hopefully rendering it invisible to casual observation. She would proceed on foot, carrying only essentials: the recorder, microphones, water, basic supplies, and Abernathy's journal wrapped in waterproof material. Lighter, faster, quieter. The hike back towards the valley felt different. The fear remained, a cold knot in her gut, but now it mingled with purpose. Kalen's whispered words echoed in her mind. Abernathy. He tried. What had he tried? And how could she reach Kalen without alerting Vorlag or his monstrous enforcers? She skirted the main path, moving through the dense woods parallel to the ridge. The going was slow, tangled vines and thick brush impeding her progress. The air grew heavy with the river's metallic tang much sooner than before. The low hum vibrated constantly, a background noise that had become disturbingly familiar. She found a new observation point, lower down the slope than the previous ledge, closer to the settlement but screened by a cluster of thick, moss-covered boulders. From here, she had a clearer view of the huts and the main gathering area near the river bank. The settlement seemed unusually active. More figures moved between the buildings than she'd seen previously. A sense of tense anticipation hung in the air, palpable even from a distance. Decorations, crude garlands woven from river reeds and disturbingly red flowers, the blood blooms she'd read about, adorned some of the hut entrances. Something significant was happening today. Mara set up her directional microphone, aiming it towards the center of the settlement. Voices drifted up, fragments of conversation too indistinct to understand. But the tone was different. Less monotonous chanting, more agitated discussion. She spotted Vorlag moving among the figures, his dark robes swirling around him. He gestured emphatically, his voice carrying occasionally, sharp and commanding, though the words remained elusive. Then she saw Kalen. He stood near his hut, shoulders slumped, being spoken to by an older cultist, a woman with faintly webbed fingers and unsettlingly damp-looking skin, Sister Genva perhaps, the one responsible for indoctrination according to Abernathy's scant notes on the cult structure. Kalen shook his head repeatedly, his gestures becoming more agitated. Genva placed a hand on his arm, her touch seeming less comforting, more restraining. After a moment, Kalen seemed to deflate, nodding slowly, his gaze fixed on the ground. Genva patted his arm, a gesture devoid of warmth, before moving off towards the main group congregating near the river. A ceremony. Kalen was involved. His reluctance was plain. Was this the first draft Abernathy hinted at, an initiation? Mara focused the microphone, adjusting the gain, straining to catch any comprehensible words. Vorlag addressed the gathered cultists. His voice, amplified slightly by the valley's acoustics, reached Mara more clearly now. The river provides, the river sustains. Its gifts are transformation, clarity, union. His voice held a hypnotic cadence, rising and falling rhythmically. The hum from the river seemed to intensify as he spoke, underscoring his words. Today, another joins the flow. Another embraces the crimson truth. He gestured towards Kalen, who was being led forward reluctantly by two burly cultists. Kalen looked pale, his eyes wide with fear, darting around as if seeking escape. Kalen steps forward, Vorlag intoned, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate yet carrying across the distance. Raised among us, nourished by the valley, he now accepts the river's greatest blessing, the first draft. A murmur went through the crowd. Some looked eager, faces rapt. Others watched Kalen with expressions Mara couldn't decipher: pity, fear, resignation. Sister Genva approached carrying a ceremonial cup, intricately carved from dark wood, filled to the brim with the opaque crimson liquid dipped directly from the river. Steam, or perhaps a faint red mist, curled from its surface. She offered it to Kalen. He hesitated, hands trembling. He looked towards the forest, towards the slopes, his gaze sweeping past Mara's hiding place without recognition. A silent plea for intervention. Vorlag stepped closer to him. Drink, Kalen, embrace the communion, become one with the water, one with us. Refusal is unthinkable. The last word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threat. Grok lumbered into view at the edge of the clearing, slime hide glistening, red eyes fixed on Kalen, a visible reminder of the consequences of disobedience. Kalen closed his eyes for a moment. A single tear tracked through the grime on his cheek. Then, with a visible effort, he took the cup from Genva. His hands shook so badly, red liquid sloshed over the rim, staining his simple tunic. He raised the cup slowly, pausing before his lips. The silence stretched, broken only by the river's hum and Kalen's ragged breathing, audible even through Mara's microphone. He tilted the cup. He drank, a long, slow draught. The cultists watched intently, their faces unnervingly still. Vorlag smiled, a tight, predatory expression. Grok shifted its weight, emitting a low grunt of satisfaction. Kalen lowered the empty cup, gasping, coughing. His eyes bulged. Red liquid dribbled from the corner of his mouth. He swayed on his feet. The two cultists steadied him. A change was happening fast. His skin took on a reddish tinge. Veins stood out on his neck and temples, pulsing darkly. He clawed at his throat, making choking sounds. "The river accepts him," Vorlag proclaimed, raising his hands. "The transformation begins, clarity approaches." Kalen convulsed. His body arched backward, spine cracking audibly. He let out a choked scream, morphing into a wet gurgle. He collapsed to his knees, retching violently. Not food, but thick, crimson sludge splattered onto the ground. His eyes rolled back in his head. His limbs twitched spastically. Mara watched in horror, recorder running, capturing every horrifying sound. This wasn't enlightenment. This was poisoning, possession, a violent, agonizing dissolution of self. Abernathy wrote of transformation, but this grotesque spectacle surpassed any dry academic description. Cultists surrounded Kalen, not with concern, but with fervent curiosity, murmuring chants, touching his twitching limbs. Vorlag watched, face alight with zealous fervor. Sister Genva knelt beside Kalen, wiping the crimson sludge from his mouth with a cloth, murmuring soothing, nonsensical words. Kalen's convulsions subsided gradually, replaced by tremors. He remained kneeling, head bowed, breathing in harsh, wet gasps. After several minutes, he slowly raised his head. His eyes focused, but they were different. The fear was gone, replaced by a vacant, glassy stare. A faint reddish hue lingered in the whites of his eyes. He looked around, seemingly bewildered, disconnected. "He sees," Vorlag announced softly. "The first veil lifts. Welcome, Kalen." Kalen didn't respond. He simply stared, his expression unreadable. The initiation, it seemed, was complete, or perhaps just beginning. The cultists helped him to his feet, guiding his unsteady steps towards his hut. The ceremony dispersed, the crowd murmuring excitedly. Vorlag watched Kalen go, his smile unwavering. Mara felt sick. The casual brutality, the religious fervor masking horrific violation, it was overwhelming. Kalen, the potential contact, the source of the whispered dissent, was lost. The river had claimed him, or Vorlag had. She stayed hidden, recording the aftermath. The cleanup crew efficiently dealt with the mess Kalen made, scooping the sludge back into the river. Grok lumbered back into the forest. Life in the settlement resumed its slow pace, but the air felt heavier, charged with the recent display of the rivers and Vorlag's power. What now? Her potential inside contact was gone, transformed into what? A mindless drone, a future guardian. The whispers she'd recorded seemed like a message from a dead man. Leaving felt like the only sane option. Let the authorities handle this. Report what she'd found. But Abernathy's face swam in her mind. He tried. Tried what? To escape, to fight back, to find the source. What if Kalen wasn't entirely lost? What if some flicker of his former self remained beneath the surface, trapped behind those vacant eyes? Could the transformation be resisted, reversed? Unlikely. Wishful thinking born of desperation. She scanned the settlement again. Kalen's hut remained closed. Vorlag conferred with Sister Genva near the river bank. Other cultists went about their tasks, mending nets woven from strange fibers, tending to patches of bloated-looking vegetables near the huts, scraping hides stretched on wooden frames. Hides that looked disturbingly large, disturbingly pale. The scraping sound reminded her of the noises from the previous night. Butchery. Hides. Her gaze swept towards the back of the settlement, the area obscured from her previous vantage point. From here she could see a crude structure, little more than a lean-to against the rock face. Outside it, several large hides were indeed stretched, curring in the damp air, and beside them, leaning against the rock, were tools, cleavers, knives, and a large, wicked-looking bone saw, its teeth stained crimson. A figure emerged from the lean-to. A man, broad-shouldered, skin stained the color of dried blood, wearing a leather apron similarly coated. Jeb, the flesh tanner. He picked up the bone saw and began rhythmically scraping it against a whetstone. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. The sound grated on Mara's nerves. He worked methodically, eyes downcast, humming a tuneless, discordant melody. Where did the hides come from? The mutated boar she'd seen was large, but these seemed larger still. And the color. Suddenly a piercing shriek cut through the air. Not Kalen, not the sirens. A raw sound of pure terror, abruptly silenced. It came from the direction of the forest edge, near where Grok patrolled. Mara's head snapped up. Cultists paused in their work, looking towards the sound, but without alarm, more like anticipation. Vorlag turned, a flicker of interest on his face. Jeb stopped his scraping, listening. Minutes passed. Then Grok emerged from the trees, dragging something limp and ragged behind it. Mara raised her binoculars, dread coiling in her stomach. It was a person, or had been, dressed in hiker's clothes, torn and soaked with crimson slime. Impossible to tell age or gender. Grok dragged the body towards the settlement, leaving a glistening red trail on the grass. It stopped near Vorlag, dropping its burden with a wet thud. Vorlag inspected the body dispassionately, prodding it with his foot. He exchanged a few words with Grok, who responded with guttural clicks and grunts. Vorlag nodded, then gestured towards Jeb. The flesh tanner put down his saw and approached, wiping his hands on his apron. He looked at the body, then at Vorlag, awaiting instructions. Vorlag spoke briefly, gesturing towards the lean-to. Jeb nodded, grabbed the body by an arm, and began dragging it away towards his workspace. The other cultists returned to their tasks, seemingly unfazed. Another offering for the river, or perhaps raw material for Jeb. Mara couldn't breathe. An outsider, a hiker, a lost tourist, someone who stumbled into the wrong valley, just like Abernathy, just like she almost had. This wasn't just a self-contained cult, it was actively predatory. The river demanded sustenance and the cult provided it. She had to get the recordings out. Now, forget Kalen, forget Abernathy's mystery. Survival was paramount. She began carefully packing her microphone, eyes darting nervously towards the settlement, towards the path Jeb had taken, towards the forest where Grok had returned. As she folded the tripod, a flicker of movement near Kalen's hut caught her eye. The door opened a crack. An eye peered out, scanning the area. Not vacant, sharp, aware, terrified, it met Mara's gaze across the distance. Recognition flickered. Then Kalen subtly shook his head, a minute gesture almost imperceptible. A warning, don't approach, not safe. Before Mara could react, the eye vanished and the door clicked shut. He wasn't lost, not entirely. The transformation hadn't completely wiped his mind. He was trapped, playing a part, terrified but aware. The warning was clear, but it also meant there was still a chance, a sliver of hope in the overwhelming horror. But how to act on it, how to reach him when Vorlag watched everything and the valley itself seemed hostile. Staying hidden was no longer just about observation. It was about waiting for an opportunity, however slight, that might not come before the valley claimed her too. Chapter 5: The River's Embrace. Days blurred into a tense cycle of observation and evasion. Mara shifted her hiding spot frequently, moving along the slopes ringing the valley, never staying in one place long enough to leave significant traces. She rationed her dwindling supplies, supplementing her water from small, clear streams trickling down the upper slopes, avoiding anything that flowed towards the Crimson River. Sleep came in short, nervous bursts, punctuated by the valley's unsettling sounds. The river's hum, the distant chants, the occasional scream abruptly silenced, the scraping from Jeb's lean-to. She kept Kalen's hut under surveillance whenever possible. He emerged for communal meals and rituals, his movements stiff, unnatural, his eyes maintaining the vacant stare demanded by Vorlag. He performed assigned tasks, tending the strange gardens, mending fishing nets with robotic compliance. But occasionally, when he thought no one watched, Mara caught glimpses of the old Kalen, a flicker of anguish in his eyes, a subtle tension in his jaw, a hand briefly clenching into a fist before relaxing. He was playing a dangerous game, wearing the mask of the river's embrace while his true self remained trapped within. He never gave another overt sign towards Mara's hiding places. The single headshake had been a desperate warning, a risk he couldn't repeat. Mara understood. Any attempt at communication was too dangerous for both of them. Vorlag's gaze seemed omnipresent. The high priest moved through the settlement with quiet authority, his crimson-tinged skin glowing faintly in the dim light, his eyes missing nothing. Grok patrolled the perimeter relentlessly. The crimson hounds hunted the forests, and the river sirens. Their song sometimes drifted up on the breeze, cold and captivating, pulling at Mara's senses, a constant reminder of the river's insidious power. Mara focused on documenting everything. She filled memory cards with audio recordings, Vorlag's sermons promising unity through dissolution, the sirens' hypnotic calls, the mundane yet sinister sounds of cult life, the chilling efficiency of Jeb at his work. She filled notebooks with sketches, observations, timelines, trying to piece together the cult's structure, their beliefs, the source of the river's corruption. Abernathy's journal offered fragmented clues, mentions of ancient carvings deeper in the valley, whispers of a heart beneath the riverbed, the importance of the source. One evening, watching the cultists gather for their ritual immersion, Mara noticed something new. Several figures, their transformations more advanced, patches of scaled skin, slight limb distortions, eyes filmed with a reddish membrane, carried long poles. They waded into the crimson current, not chanting but probing the riverbed rhythmically. Vorlag watched from the bank, his expression intense. What were they searching for? The heart Abernathy mentioned, or perhaps retrieving something. Mara recalled the hiker Grok dragged in. Had the body been deposited? She shuddered, aiming her parabolic microphone. The sounds were mostly obscured by the river's flow, but she caught occasional sharp clicks, as if the poles struck something solid beneath the mud. After an hour, they seemed to find something. Working together, they hauled a heavy, misshapen object wrapped in reeds onto the bank. From Mara's distance, it was impossible to identify, but its size and rough shape were disturbingly human. Jeb was summoned. He dragged the bundle away towards his linta without ceremony. The cycle continued. The river demanded, the cult provided, Jeb processed. Mara's supplies were critically low. Water was manageable, but food was almost gone. Hunger gnawed constantly, weakening her resolve. The isolation pressed down, heavy and suffocating. Doubts crept in. What was she achieving? Kalen was unreachable. The evidence she gathered was damning, but useless if she didn't get it out. Starving to death on a mountainside while documenting horrors seemed increasingly pointless. She decided, one more day, one more attempt to find something concrete about the source Abernathy sought, then retreat. Survival first. Following a hunch based on Abernathy's fragmented notes about upstream paths and carvings, Mara bypassed the settlement entirely the next morning, circling wide through the dense forest, pushing deeper into the valley along the river's northern fork. The terrain grew wilder, the trees older, larger, draped in heavy moss. The river here was narrower, faster, its crimson color seeming even more concentrated. The hum intensified, vibrating through the soles of her boots. After hours of difficult trekking, she found them. Carvings, not on stone but etched into the living bark of colossal, ancient trees lining the riverbank. The patterns were complex, alien, depicting serpentine forms intertwined with suffering humanoid figures. They seemed to writhe, pulsing with a faint inner light that matched the river's hue. At the center of the most prominent carving, a symbol recurred, a spiral descending into a dark core. The source. Beneath one carved tree, partially hidden by ferns, lay a small pile of stones. A marker. Abernathy. Mara knelt, heart pounding. Carefully, she removed the top stones. Beneath them lay a small, oilskin-wrapped package. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped it. Inside was a slim notebook, Abernathy's final journal, and a small, crudely drawn map. She opened the notebook. The handwriting was frantic, barely legible. Abernathy described finding the carvings, deciphering parts of the cult's true history, not enlightenment, but enslavement to an ancient entity dwelling beneath the riverbed. The Crimson River wasn't water. It was the entity's blood, its effluent, a medium for control and consumption. The source wasn't a spring, but a wound, a weak point where the entity bled into the valley. He wrote of Vorlag actively feeding the entity, increasing its power, believing himself its chosen interpreter. The final pages detailed Abernathy's desperate plan. He believed the entity drew power through specific conduits, nodal points along the river marked by the carvings. He theorized that disrupting the flow at the source itself, the wound, might weaken it, perhaps even sever its connection to the valley. The map showed the location, a cave system hidden behind a waterfall further upstream. Going to try, the last entry read. May the river forgive me, or forget me. Mara stared at the map at the final words. Abernathy hadn't just tried to escape. He'd tried to fight back. He'd gone to the source, and never returned. A noise snapped her back to reality. Voices. Approaching. Cultists. Mara quickly rewrapped the journal and map, stuffing them inside her jacket, scattering the stones to hide the disturbed earth. She scrambled for cover behind the massive trunk of the carved tree, peering out cautiously. Two cultists emerged from the woods carrying ritual poles. Their transformations were advanced. Their skin had a rubbery, reddish texture, gills fluttered uselessly on their necks. They stopped near the carved trees, scanning the area. They hadn't seen her. They spoke in low, guttural tones the river-tongue Vorlag used. Mara couldn't understand, but their gestures pointed towards the carvings, then further upstream. They seemed to be searching for something, or someone. Abernathy, or her. They moved off, following the river path towards the waterfall Abernathy marked on his map, towards the source. Mara hesitated. Following them was suicide. But Abernathy's final journal, his map, this was the breakthrough she needed, the proof, the explanation. She had to protect it, and perhaps see the source for herself. She gave the cultists a wide berth, shadowing them through the dense forest. The hum grew louder, becoming a physical pressure in her ears and chest. The air grew colder, damper. She heard the roar of a waterfall ahead. Peering through the trees, she saw it, a cascade of crimson water plunging down a rock face into a churning pool below. Hidden behind the falls, almost invisible, was the dark opening of a cave. The source. The two cultists stood before the cave entrance, conferring. They seemed reluctant to enter. One prodded the dark opening with his pole. Then a sound echoed from within the cave. A low, resonant pulse, like a giant heartbeat. It shook the ground beneath Mara's feet. The hum intensified to an almost unbearable level. The cultists looked at each other, fear visible even on their transformed features. They backed away from the cave mouth, turning as if to retreat. Suddenly, movement exploded from the cave. Not grok, something worse. Formless, fluid, a wave of pure crimson sludge surged out, engulfing the two cultists before they could react. There were no screams, just a wet, sucking sound. The sludge momentarily took on their vague shapes, writhing, before collapsing back into a quivering mound, leaving no trace of the figures it had absorbed. The mound flowed sluggishly back towards the cave entrance, drawn by the pulsing heartbeat within. Mara clamped a hand over her mouth, stifling a cry. Raw, elemental horror. The river wasn't just water, it was alive, sentient, predatory. Or rather, the entity controlling it was. This was its sanctum. She had to get out. Now, forget everything else. She turned to flee, but her foot caught on a root. She stumbled, crashing through the undergrowth, landing heavily. Silence. The pulsing from the cave stopped. The river's hum seemed to lessen, becoming watchful, waiting. Slowly, Mara pushed herself up. Pain shot through her ankle, sprained, badly. She tried to put weight on it, collapsing again with a gasp. Panic surged, cold and overwhelming, trapped, injured, exposed. From the direction of the settlement, she heard it. The baying of crimson hounds, getting closer. They'd found her trail, or they'd been sent. She looked desperately towards the cave, towards the source of the horror. then back towards the sound of the approaching hounds, caught between the entity's heart and its hunting beasts. A figure appeared at the edge of the clearing near the waterfall. Kalen. His eyes were no longer vacant. They burned with desperate intensity. He carried no weapon, only a small bundle wrapped in leaves. He saw Mara, saw her injured ankle, saw the fear in her eyes. His gaze flickered towards the cave, then towards the sound of the hounds. He made a decision. He rushed towards her, ignoring the danger from the cave. Quickly, he hissed, his voice raw, unused. "They come, Vorlag knows." He pulled Mara to her feet, supporting her weight. "The cave, Abernathy showed me. Another way out, maybe." Hope, fragile and unexpected, surged through Mara. But behind them the hounds burst into the clearing, red eyes blazing, fangs bared. And from the cave, the poolsing resumed, slow, deliberate, hungry. The river prepared to embrace them all. Chapter 6, Crimson Dawn. "Move," Kalen urged, half dragging, half carrying Mara towards the roaring waterfall. The pain in her ankle was a white-hot agony, but the terror of the approaching hounds spurred her onward. Their savage baying echoed off the rocks, mingling with the deep, resonant pulse emanating from the cave behind the falls. They plunged through the curtain of crimson water. It felt thick, viscous, clinging like syrup, blindingly red. Mara choked, sputtering, the metallic tang coating her throat. Inside, the cave mouth yawned a darkness that seemed to swallow the roar of the falls. The poolsing sound was deafening here, vibrating through Mara's bones, shaking the very rock beneath their feet. The air was thick, cloying, smelling of decay and something ancient, indescribably foul. Kalen didn't hesitate. He pulled Mara deeper into the darkness, away from the entrance where the formless sludge monster lurked. Abernathy found a fissure. "Leads up, away from the main chamber," he gasped, his voice strained against the poolsing thrum. He produced a small, flickering oil lamp from the bundle he carried, casting dancing shadows on walls that seemed to writhe with carved patterns similar to those on the trees, but deeper, more disturbing. They depicted the entity, a vast, amorphous shape with countless tendrils absorbing figures, merging them into its mass. Behind them, the hounds hesitated at the waterfall's edge, whining, unwilling to enter the entity's sanctum. But a new sound joined the cacophony, Vorlag's commanding voice, urging them onward, laced with the river tongue that seemed to bypass canine fear. "This way." Kalen pulled Mara towards a narrow opening low on the cave wall, barely visible behind a cluster of stalactites dripping crimson slime. They squeezed through into a tight passage that sloped steeply upward. The poolsing faded slightly behind them, muffled by the rock, but the air remained thick, oppressive. The passage twisted, turned, sometimes requiring them to crawl. Mara's ankle screamed in protest, but Kalen's desperate strength kept her moving. "Vorlag," he knew Abernathy was here, Kalen panted, his voice echoing in the confined space. He let him come, let him see the heart, then fed him to it. Vorlag believes sacrifices at the source strengthen his connection, grant him more control. "And you," Mara managed, gasping for breath. "The first draft, how did you?" "Resisted," Kalen said, his voice tight. "Fought it, Abernathy, before they took him. He told me secrets, ways to hold on, pretend, but Vorlag suspects, he watches, the initiation. It was a test. He enjoys breaking those who resist. He shuddered. The river, it whispers, promises, shows you things hard to ignore. The passage opened into a slightly larger chamber. It smelled strongly of damp earth and something else, stale air, as if this part of the cave system connected to the outer world. Kalen held the lamp high. A faint gray light filtered down from a crack high above. Escape. But blocking their path stood Grok. It must have entered through another passage, summoned by Vorlag. It filled the chamber, its bulk immense in the confined space. Its red eyes fixed on them, burning with dull malevolence. It raised its fused bone and stone club, slime dripping from its hide, pooling at its feet. Kalen pushed Mara behind him. "Go," he yelled, shoving the lamp into her hand. "Climb, I'll hold him." "No," Mara cried, fumbling with the lamp. Kalen ignored her. He turned to face the guardian, grabbing a loose rock from the cave floor. He looked small, frail against the monstrous bulk of Grok. "You took my family," Kalen screamed, his voice raw with grief and fury, the mask of compliance shattered. "You serve the thing that poisons us all." He threw the rock. It struck Grok's shoulder with pathetic force. The guardian barely flinched. It advanced, club raised high, emitting a low, guttural growl. Mara scrambled towards the fissure above, lamp held high, searching for handholds. Abernathy's journal and map felt heavy inside her jacket. She had to get them out. She owed Kalen that much. She owed Abernathy. Kalen dodged Grok's first clumsy swing, the club smashing against the cave wall, showering sparks and rock fragments. He darted in, striking at Grok's legs with his fists, desperate, futile blows. Grok roared, swiping again. Kalen stumbled back, cornered. Mara found a purchase, hauling herself upward. The fissure was narrow, rough. Below, Grok raised its club for a final blow. Kalen closed his eyes. Suddenly, a chorus of unearthly voices echoed through the cave system, not from the main chamber but from passages nearby. The river sirens, but the song was different. Not seductive, but sharp, dissonant, filled with pain and rage. It slammed into Grok like a physical force. The guardian staggered, clutching its head, roaring in agony. Its red eyes flickered. It seemed confused, momentarily losing focus on Kalen. Kalen seized the chance. He lunged forward, not attacking, but scrambling past the disoriented guardian towards the passage leading back to the main chamber, back towards the pulsing heart. "The sirens!" he yelled up at Mara. "They hate Vorlag too. He controls them, forces them. Abernathy told me. They remember. Before." Grok recovered, shaking its massive head, and turned its fury on Kalen again, lumbering after him into the passage. Mara hesitated. Leave Kalen, follow the siren's lead. She climbed higher, reaching the source of the gray light, a narrow opening choked with roots and earth, leading to the surface. Freedom was inches away. Below, the sounds of struggle intensified. Kalen's shouts, Grok's roars, the siren's piercing, angry song, and underpinning it all, the deep, thrumming pulse of the entity awakening. Then Vorlag's voice echoed, sharp, commanding, speaking the river tongue. The siren's song faltered, turning into choked sobs. Vorlag was regaining control. A final, agonized scream tore through the cave, Kalen's. Then silence, except for the returning pulse and Vorlag's triumphant laughter echoing from the depths. Tears streamed down Mara's face. Kaelin was gone, sacrificed, but he'd bought her time. She clawed frantically at the roots blocking the opening, pulling herself through the narrow gap, scraping skin, tearing clothes. She emerged into cool, clean air, into the gray light of dawn filtering through the forest canopy. She was high on the valley slope, far from the settlement, far from the waterfall cave. She lay gasping on damp earth, smelling pine needles and freedom. Painfully, she dragged herself to her feet, leaning heavily on a tree. Her ankle throbbed, but she could put slight weight on it. She had Abernathy's journal, the map, her own recordings. Proof, evidence, a story that needed telling. She looked back towards the valley. The crimson river snaked below, partially obscured by mist, looking almost peaceful in the dawn light. But she knew what lurked beneath the surface, what pulsed in the hidden cave, what horrors the settlement concealed. Vorlag remained, his power potentially strengthened. The entity slumbered, waiting, bleeding its influence into the world. Turning her back on the valley, Mara began the slow, agonizing limp towards civilization, towards safety, towards the world that needed to hear about the crimson river and the darkness festering in its depths. Getting the story out was Kaelin's legacy, Abernathy's too, and now hers. The hum seemed fainter here, but she suspected she would carry its echo and the crimson stain on her memory forever. The dawn felt less like a new beginning, more like a brief reprieve before the inevitable tide. The end.